The postcard carried no signature, only one line in a trembling hand. She asks about you every day. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Emmett Castellano read it 3 times, cleared his calendar, and drove to Chicago. For 8 years he had believed his mother was fine, because every month his eldest brother Sterling answered with the same worn sentence, smooth as a coin rubbed thin in a pocket. She's fine. I've got it handled. And he had believed it, because on the first of every month, $22,000 left his account as steadily as the tide. In a world where men lowered their voices at the name Castellano, money had never been a thing that failed to solve something. He came back not to visit, but to collect her, carrying the keys to an apartment above the lake, and a promise he had kept for 8 years. In front of the gray stone house on Fullerton Avenue, the fountain had frozen into a clouded block. No one had shoveled the steps, and there were no footprints in the snow but his own. The door opened, but the person behind it was not his mother. It was a young woman with flowers still on her hands, and the hollowed eyes of someone who had not slept through a night in a long time. She looked at the man this city feared, looked at the 6 men behind him, and did not step back an inch. Inside, breath hung in the air. The 7-day pill organizer held medicine in only 3 compartments. On the oak floor were 4 deep indentations in a rectangle, exactly where a grand piano had stood for 34 years. And at the end of the hallway, in an armchair turned toward the window, a woman still held her back straight out of a lifetime's habit at a piano bench, though the cardigan now hung loose on her shoulders. Emmett needed 3 full breaths to recognize his own mother. She turned her head, pulled the blanket quickly over her swollen, cold, reddened hands, and smiled the smile of someone who had practiced it many times in a mirror. "Have you eaten? I'm doing just fine, sweetheart, don't you worry." In the kitchen, the young woman with flour on her hands turned away because she knew what it would cost him everything to understand. One brother had signed the house into his own name, with a forged signature. The other had signed as witness, and for 19 months, the only person keeping his mother alive had been a stranger who never took a single dollar, living under a theft charge for something she never did. The man who had everything was about to face a question that not $1 of his 8 years could buy. How do you forgive yourself for believing that sending money home was ever enough? If this story reaches you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Dinner came out of the cupboard in 3 pieces, and Emmett understood the arithmetic of it before his mother had finished setting the table. A can of white beans warmed in a saucepan, half a loaf of rye that had gone stiff at the ends, sliced thin enough to hide it, 4 eggs, and she cracked only 2. And he watched her hesitate over the 3rd before she set the carton back in the refrigerator, with the care of a woman returning something to a shelf in a store she could not afford. She carried the plates herself. She would not let him carry them. She had done this walk from the stove to the table thousands of times over 30 and more years, and she did it now in small, deliberate steps, one hand skimming the counter's edge, and she set his plate down first the way she always had, the fuller one, the one with the eggs on it. Emmett sat where he had sat as a boy. He did not look at his plate. He looked at the walls. There was a bright rectangle above the sideboard, where something had hung long enough to keep the paint from fading, and another beside the doorway, smaller, and a 3rd above the radiator that was shaped like a clock. The wallpaper remembered what the house no longer had. He counted 6 of them between the kitchen and the front room, and he did not ask about a single one, because he had learned a long time ago that a question asked too early gives away everything you know and buys you nothing. In the kitchen behind him, the young woman ran the water. She had been offered a chair. His mother had asked her twice, once with her voice and once with her eyes, and both times the young woman had said she was fine, where she was, and turned back to the sink. She washed the saucepan. She washed the cutting board. She washed things that were already clean, and Emmett understood that she was not being modest and she was not being servile. She was standing guard. Then his mother folded her hands beside her plate and asked him about his work. She asked whether the shipping side had recovered from the winter, and whether he still kept the office near the water, and whether the man named Rourke was still with him after all this time. She asked whether he ate breakfast. She asked whether the apartment he lived in got morning light or afternoon light, because a person needed one or the other, and somewhere in the middle of it, Emmett stopped hearing the questions and started hearing the shape of them. They were too even. They came one after another with no room between, no drifting, no what was I going to say. They came the way a woman recites a list she has kept folded in a pocket for a long while, taking it out at night, adding to it, smoothing the creases, so that if the day ever came, she would not be caught standing in her own kitchen, with nothing to say to her own son. She had not been waiting to talk to him. She had been rehearsing. He answered every question. He heard his own voice doing it, steady and pleasant, the voice he used with men who were deciding whether to be afraid of him, and he hated it, and he could not find another one. His mother listened as though each answer were a gift being handed across the table. When he told her the office still looked out over the water, she closed her eyes for a second, and he realized she was placing him somewhere, giving the last 8 years a room and a window so she could put him inside it. Later, when she had gone up and the house had gone quiet, he went out to the porch with his coat over his shoulders and stood in the cold and made one call. The street was dark in both directions. Every window on the block had gone black hours ago. The line picked up on the second ring, and the voice on the other end was awake and sharp, and did not ask what time it was, because nobody who worked for Emmett Castellano ever asked him what time it was. He gave 3 instructions, and he did not repeat any of them. Then he stood a moment longer, looking back through the glass at the light still burning over the kitchen sink, and he asked the last question of the night. Who is she? The folder was on the dining table before the light was fully up, left there by a man who had come and gone without waking anyone, and it was thin, which told Emmett something before he opened it. Thin meant a life with no complications in it, or a life that had been picked clean. He sat down with his coffee and opened it the way he had opened 1,000 folders, which was to say, with the answer already written in his head. Her name was Maeve Donnelly, 27 years old, and she had been living in his mother's house for 4 years, and he expected the file to explain what she was taking. It did not. The first page was a bakery on Halsted Street, night shift, 11 at night until 4 in the morning, 5 nights a week, going on 3 years, and a note that she was never late. The second page was a nursing program at a community college, 2 miles west. 3 years completed, the 4th year begun, and then stopped in the middle of a semester. No withdrawal filed, just a stop, the way a person stops walking when someone calls their name behind them. The third page was 3 pawn tickets, all of them in her name, all of them from the same shop on Ashland Avenue, and Emmett read them slowly because pawn tickets tell you what a person had and what they needed more: a gold chain, a wristwatch, gentleman's, which meant it had belonged to someone else once, and the third one had a line on it he read 4 times. Under purpose, in a clerk's careless hand, someone had written headstone. He sat with that for a while and did not understand it, and he did not like the feeling, because he had built a life on the principle that anything he did not understand was simply information he had not paid enough for yet. The last page was a police report, a theft complaint, 1 bracelet, filed against her by a member of the household, still open, still unresolved, hanging over her like weather. Nobody in the folder said anything about wages. Nobody had to. He sat there in the cold kitchen with the pages spread in front of him and did the arithmetic himself. The pawn shop against the bakery against the stopped semester, the theft charge against a woman who had somehow not left, and he understood that he had been reading the file backward from the first page. He had come looking for what she was taking. The file was a record of what she had been spending. When she came down, her coat was still on from the walk home, and there was flour in the crease of her sleeve. She saw the folder open on the table, and she did not flinch, and she did not explain. She went to the stove and put the kettle on for his mother the way she did every morning, and only then did she turn around and look at him and wait. He took out his checkbook and wrote a figure across it that would have closed the pawn tickets, cleared the tuition, paid a lawyer good enough to make the police report disappear, and left enough behind that she would never again have to stand in a bakery at 3 in the morning. He set it on the table and slid it toward her with 2 fingers, the way he had slid things across tables to men who had gone pale with relief. Maeve looked at it. She did not pick it up. She did not read the number, and he was certain of that, because her eyes went to it and away again too fast for anyone to read 7 figures of anything. She slid it back across the wood until it stopped against his hand. "That's not what I'm here for," she said. "You've been paid nothing for 4 years. I know what I've been paid. Then take it and be paid." She was quiet for a moment, and when she answered him, her voice was not sharp, which somehow made it worse. "If I take that, you'll leave on Thursday," she said. "You'll go back to your city, and you'll feel better about it. And this house will be exactly what it was on Monday, except she'll have watched one more person walk out the door with a clear conscience." The kettle began to rattle behind her. "She isn't a bill you can settle." Then she turned around and took it off the heat, because upstairs his mother was awake, and it was time. The knock came a little after 10, 3 short raps, the kind a man uses when he has knocked on a great many doors and expects none of them to be happy to see him. Maeve opened it because she always opened it, and the man on the step was somewhere past 50, with a clipboard held against his chest like a shield and a van at the curb with its engine still running. He said good morning and he said he was sorry, and then he read from the clipboard in the flat voice of someone who has learned that flatness is the only mercy available to him. He was there to collect against a schedule of secured property. He named a walnut sideboard. He named a set of dining chairs. He named a piano bench, described on the sheet as one bench, walnut, upholstered. And he glanced past her into the front room as he said it, already looking for it. Maeve did not move out of the doorway. She heard herself say that nothing in this house belonged to anyone but the woman upstairs, and she heard how thin it sounded, because she had said versions of it before and it had never once worked. Then Emmett came down the hall behind her. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask what was happening. He put out his hand for the clipboard, and the man gave it to him, which was itself a small, strange thing. And Emmett read the schedule the whole way down, both pages, in no hurry at all, while the van idled at the curb and the cold came in through the open door. When he reached the bottom, he read one line aloud, and the line he chose was not the sideboard or the chairs or the bench. It was the name of the surety company printed in small type at the foot of the page, the firm that stood behind the man on the step, and behind the van, and behind the whole enterprise. And Emmett said the name slowly, the way a man reads something back to be sure he has it right. Then he said it a second time, quieter. Then he folded the 2 pages once, folded them again, and put them into the inside pocket of his coat. He handed back the empty clipboard. "You'll want to call your office before you drive anywhere," he said. The man looked at the folded shape in Emmett's coat, and at Emmett, and something went out of his face. He said he would do that. He said the word "sir" on the way down the steps, which he had not said on the way up. The van pulled away without anyone touching a piece of furniture in the house. Emmett closed the door against the cold and went back down the hall, and the whole of it, from the knock to the closing of the door, had taken less time than it takes to boil water. The bench stayed where it was, alone at the edge of the room in front of nothing, the 4 deep marks in the oak floor in front of it holding the shape of what used to be there. Maeve stood in the hallway with her hand still on the frame of the door and waited for the relief to arrive. It did not arrive. What came instead settled low in her chest and stayed there, because she had just watched a man make another man leave without once saying a hard word, and she had spent 4 years learning exactly what it cost to be the person standing in front of someone like that. And she understood, with a clarity that made her cold, that she had no idea yet what he was, or what he would want from her when he decided that she was worth wanting something from. That evening, Maeve came to the doorway of the front room with something in her hand, and stood there long enough that Emmett looked up from the folded pages he had been reading all afternoon. She said she had been trying to decide since morning whether to give it to him, and that she had decided, and that she wanted him to know she had never once played them. Then she held out an old phone, the small kind with a cracked corner, and a charging port worn loose, and she said his mother had asked her to buy it 4 winters ago, and had never used it to call a single person. "There's a recorder on it," Maeve said. "She figured out how to work it by herself. She names them by the date." She set it in his hand. "There are 31. He asked why she had never listened. Maeve considered that for a moment. "Because she didn't make them for me," she said, and went upstairs. He waited until the house was quiet. He did not turn on a lamp. He sat in the chair his mother sat in, the one facing the window, with the phone in both hands and the glow of it, the only light in the room. And he started at the oldest one, and worked forward, and he did not skip any. The first was short and cheerful, and she called him sweetheart twice. In the 4th, she told him about a former student who had stopped by, a woman now, with 2 children of her own, and she said it as though he would remember the name, and he did not. In the 9th, she talked about a bird that came to the sill. In the 11th, her voice was thinner, and she apologized for that and blamed a cold she said was already going. In the 14th, she said she had been thinking about the year he was 7 and would not sleep unless a door was left open, and she said she still left that door open sometimes without meaning to. In the 17th, she asked whether he was eating breakfast, and he sat in the dark and heard the same question she had asked him across the table 2 nights before, word for word, and understood that she had been practicing it on this phone for 4 years. In the 22nd, she said the house was cold, and then she laughed at herself, and said an old house is always cold, and that she was not complaining. In the 25th, she said, quietly, and without any lead into it, that she had been a good teacher, and that she hoped somebody somewhere still played because of her, and then she said that was a vain thing to say, and she was sorry, and she did not record another one for a long while after that. He listened to all of them. The last file was dated the second week of February, 2 winters gone, and it was recorded late, because the room behind her voice had that particular hollow quiet that houses only get after midnight. She did not say sweetheart. She said his name once, plainly, the way she used to say it from the bottom of the stairs. She said they came for it today. She said she signed a paper because she had been told she had to, and that she had not read all of it. She said the men were polite, and one of them held the door. Then there was a stretch of nothing, 7 or 8 seconds of a room breathing, and from somewhere across that room a young woman's voice came in, low, unaware that anything was being recorded, saying, "Please come out of the cold now." And his mother said, "All right," and the recording ended. It ran 22 seconds. He played it again. He played it a third time, holding the phone closer, because part of him was still waiting for the sentence that must have come after, the one where she asked him for something, and it was not there, and it had never been there in any of the 31. Not one of them was a request. Not one of them had ever been sent. He set the phone face down on his knee and sat in the chair without moving, while the window went from black to the gray that comes before anything else, and the radiator knocked twice and went silent. And at some point, he heard the floorboards overhead as Maeve got up for her shift, and heard the front door open and close very softly, the sound of a person who has spent years learning how to leave a house without waking anyone in it. When the light was full, he stood up. He went into the kitchen and found the charging cord in the drawer where his mother kept string and rubber bands, plugged the phone in at the outlet by the counter, and left it there, upright against the backsplash, where she would see it when she came down. The branch on Clark Street had been his mother's bank since before he could read, and the manager who came out to meet him did not ask why a man with his last name wanted a full accounting on a Tuesday morning. She only asked how far back, and Emmett said 8 years, and she said it would take a little while, and it did not take a little while, because she came back in under 20 minutes, with a stack still warm from the printer, and her hands not entirely steady. He read it standing at the counter. 96 transfers. One on the 1st of every month for 8 years, $22,000 each, leaving an account in his name, and landing in an account that was not his mother's. The routing was clean, and the record was complete, and there was nothing hidden in it at all, which was the part that stayed with him. Nobody had bothered to hide anything, because nobody had expected anyone to look. He turned the pages until he found the account that had his mother's name on it, and he understood the shape of the thing in stages, the way you understand a building only after you have walked all 4 sides of it. For the first 6 years, that account had lived on one thing and one thing only, which was the pension she had earned across 34 years of teaching, deposited on the 3rd of every month, and it had gone out again in small, honest amounts, gas and electric and pharmacy, and a check written on the same day of each month to Maeve Donnelly. Not much, not what the work was worth, but paid, every month, on time, out of a schoolteacher's pension. And then it stopped. 19 months ago, the pension deposit vanished from the account and did not come back. It had not been reduced. It had not lapsed. It had been redirected, and the page showed exactly where. And the same page showed that the check to Maeve Donnelly stopped in that same month and never resumed. Everything after that line was smaller. The gas bill went unpaid twice, and then went out of the account entirely. The pharmacy amounts shrank by half, and then by half again. And in the empty space where a pension used to be, Emmett understood what the 3 pawn tickets had been for, and what a stopped semester was for, and why a woman working nights on Halsted Street had gone on standing in a cold kitchen for 19 months, while the only person paying her was herself. He was still standing at the counter when Adelaide Kerr arrived, 52 years old, silver hair cut short, a woman who had spent 30 years taking apart other people's paperwork for a living, and had come up from her office in the Loop within the hour because Emmett had asked her to. She read the pages the way a surgeon reads a chart, quickly and without comment, and when she reached the redirected pension, she stopped and put one finger on the line and did not move it. "There," she said. "That's the door." Everything else came through it. She asked whether his mother had signed anything 2 years ago, anything at all, and Emmett said he did not know, and Adelaide said she would tell him what she was looking at anyway. It was a general power of attorney, not the narrow kind that lets a son pay a water bill, not the medical kind that sits in a drawer for an emergency, the broad kind, the kind drafted to hand one person the whole of another person's financial life in a single page. Banking, property, income, signature authority, all of it, effective immediately, and revocable only by the woman who signed it, provided she still understood that she could. "This is not theft the way people picture theft," Adelaide said. "There's no broken window. Somebody sat at her kitchen table and explained that she needed to sign something to keep the house safe, and she signed it. And from that afternoon on, she was a guest in her own accounts. Then he moved the pension. Then he stopped every dollar you sent. And the reason it went on this long is that nothing on paper looks wrong." She closed the folder and looked at him. "There's no crime in the ledger. There's a crime in what he did with the ledger." Dr. Ingrid Halloway had been treating Rosalind Castellano for 6 years, and she did not waste any of Emmett's time being careful with him. She turned her monitor around so he could see it himself, and she said the words plainly. "Aortic valve. Severe. Not a thing that was coming. A thing that was already here, and had been managed with pills for longer than it should have been." Then she pulled up the scheduling record, and let him read that too. And there it was in the system. A date, an operating room, a surgeon's name, a preoperative appointment, the whole apparatus of a life being saved. All of it entered 14 months ago, and all of it cancelled 11 days later. He asked why. Halloway said the insurance had lapsed in that same window, and Emmett said he did not care about the insurance, and Halloway said she had assumed he wouldn't, and that the insurance was not the reason it had stayed cancelled. She turned the screen back and folded her hands. She said his mother's chart carried a document, filed by the family, granting decision authority over her medical care to her eldest son. She said that under that document the hospital was not permitted to proceed on a procedure of this magnitude without his signature, and that a consent form had been sent to him 3 separate times, and that on each occasion the office had received acknowledgement that it had been received, and on no occasion had it come back signed. Not refused, not disputed, just not returned. Emmett sat very still. He asked whether his mother could sign for herself. Halloway said that was the question she had been asking for a year. She said a patient can revoke that kind of authority if she understands what she is revoking, and that his mother understood a great deal, more than most people her age, but that the document on file had a clause about diminished capacity in it, and that the hospital's counsel had looked at it twice, and both times had said the same thing, which was that if they operated on the strength of the patient's own signature, and something went wrong, the family member holding the authority could challenge it, and that no institution wanted to be on the losing end of that. She said she had personally called Sterling Castellano 4 times. She said the last time he had been perfectly pleasant, and had told her the family was still discussing what was best for their mother at her age. Emmett said nothing for a while. He was doing something he had done all his life, which was turning a problem over looking for the place where money went in, and the shape of this one had no such place, and he kept turning it anyway. He took out his checkbook. He wrote a number that covered the surgery and the surgeon, and the anesthesia, and the intensive care, and the rehabilitation, and the private room, and the follow-up for 2 years, and he set it on the desk and pushed it toward her, and he said, "Now tell me what stops this." Halloway looked at the check and did not touch it. She had spent 20 years in a hospital, and she had seen men do exactly this, and she answered him without any heat at all, which was why it landed the way it did. "Your money buys an operating room," she said. "It doesn't buy back the 14 months she went without one." He picked the check up. He folded it in half and put it in his coat, and he could not think of a single thing to say. Then Halloway said the other part, the part she had clearly been deciding whether to say, and she said it looking straight at him. She said in her experience there were only 2 reasons a person sat on a consent form for over a year. The first was fear. The second was that the person had done the arithmetic and understood that a death solves certain problems permanently, that debts die with people, that questions die with people, that a house with an old woman living in it is a house with a witness in it, and a house without her is only a house. She said she was not accusing anybody of anything. She said she was a physician and not a lawyer, and that she had learned to stay in her own lane. And then she said the last thing, and it was the thing that started the clock. She said the surgical team would keep the case open for 1 more review cycle. After that, the file would be closed, as declined by family, and the case would leave the schedule entirely, and getting it back on would require starting over, and starting over took months. She said, "So whatever you're going to do, it needs to be a signature. Not money. A signature. And it has to come from a man who has spent 14 months proving he won't give you one." Peggy Sturgis lived directly across Fullerton Avenue, and had lived there 41 years. and when Emmett came up her walk that afternoon, she opened the door before he reached the top step and told him she had been expecting him since Monday. She was 69 and moved like a woman 20 years younger, and she did not ask him to sit before she had put coffee in front of him. And then she said the first thing she wanted him to know, which was that she had been 11 years old the first time she sat next to his mother on a piano bench, and that she still could not hear a certain kind of slow music without hearing that voice saying, "Wrist up, wrist up." Then she went to the wall beside her refrigerator and took down a calendar. She said she had been a school secretary for 26 years, and that the habit never left her, and that she wrote everything down, deliveries, weather, who came and who went, because a secretary learns early that the person who remembers is the person who is believed. The pages went back years. She turned them slowly and read out what she had written in her small square hand, and she did not embroider any of it, and that was what made it hard to listen to. She read 2 Christmases. The first one she had marked with the words, "No cars," and she explained that she had watched from her front window that whole evening, and that Rosalind had set the table in the dining room where Peggy could see it from across the street, and that the plates had stayed on that table until the following afternoon. The second Christmas, she had written the same 2 words again, and then underneath them, in slightly smaller letters, "Still on the table Thursday." She said she had gone over that year with a ham and a pie, and that Rosalind had thanked her and made her sit, and then spent an hour talking about the neighborhood, and never once mentioned that nobody had come. She said that was the thing about his mother that people never understood. She said Rosalind Castellano would let you help her, and would never once let you pity her, and that those were not the same thing, and that she had known women who could not tell the difference their entire lives. Then Peggy turned to a page from the previous spring and stopped, and her voice changed slightly. Not louder, just more careful, the way a person's voice changes when they are handing over something that matters. She read what she had written. "Sterling here, 20 minutes. Left with his hand in his coat pocket." She looked up and said she wanted to be exact about this because she had thought about it many times since. She said she had been at her front window with the storm glass still in, and she had watched Sterling come down the steps of that house, and that he had one hand pushed down into the pocket of his overcoat and kept it there all the way to the car, and that he did not take it out to open the door. He used the other hand, and that a person only carries their hand like that when there is something in the pocket they are minding. She said she had written it down at the time, without knowing why. Then she said the part she wanted him to hear last. 3 hours later, on that same page, in that same hand, she had written a second line. "Police car. 2 officers. They went in, and when they came out the girl was with them." Peggy closed the calendar and set both hands flat on the cover. She said she had never once heard Rosalind speak a word against her eldest son, not in 8 years, not on the worst days, that there was always some reason offered on his behalf, some pressure he was under, some way in which life had not gone the way he had planned for it. She said that was what good mothers did with the children who did not deserve it. She said that was also exactly what men without any shame lived on. Then Emmett asked whether he could take the calendar, and Peggy slid it toward him, and stopped, and turned back 1 page and tore nothing, only pressed it flat with 2 fingers, and folded the whole book closed over her hand. She said there was 1 more page in there, and that he was not ready for it yet. She said, "That one keeps. You'll come back for it." The shop sat under the viaduct in Pilsen with 2 bays and a hand-painted sign that had been repainted at least twice by somebody who was not a sign painter, and Emmett found his middle brother on his back, beneath a 1966 sedan, with a welding torch going, and a radio somewhere, playing a station that had not changed its format in 30 years. He stood there and waited. Nolan saw the shoes first, then the coat, and the torch went out, and he slid himself clear, and got up wiping his hands on a rag that did nothing for them. 36 years old, and gray at the temples in a way their father had never gotten to be. For a moment neither of them said anything, and the shop ticked as the metal cooled. Then Nolan smiled, and it was a good smile, easy and quick. And he said, "Look what the weather blew in," and asked how long he was in town, and asked whether he wanted a coffee from the machine, which he did not recommend. Emmett said he had been at the house. Nolan said that was good, that Mom would love that he kept meaning to get over there more himself, but that the shop ran him ragged 6 days a week, and by Sunday he was fit for nothing. Emmett asked when he had last been. Nolan said not long. Emmett asked how long was not long, and Nolan pushed out his lower lip and looked up at the ceiling like a man honestly trying to count, and said maybe a couple of months, maybe 3, and that time got away from a person. Emmett said the pension had been moved. He said the house had been signed over on a forged signature. He said there was a witness line on the transfer document with a name on it. And he watched his brother's face while he said all of it. And his brother's face did not do a single thing, which by itself was information. Nolan said he did not know anything about any of that. He said Sterling handled the paperwork side, always had, that Sterling was the one with the head for it, and that he himself could not tell a deed from a parking ticket. He said if something was wrong, then Sterling had some explaining to do, and that Emmett should be having this conversation on the north side, and not in a garage in Pilsen. He said it all smoothly, without hurrying, the way a man says something he has said to himself many times in the dark. Emmett asked him one more time, quietly, whether he had ever signed anything. Nolan laughed, short, and said, "Come on." Then he stopped laughing and said he had a car to finish, and a customer coming at 5, and that it was good to see him, and he actually put a hand on Emmett's shoulder, and turned him a quarter turn toward the door, the way you steer a friend who has stayed too long, and said, "Go on, I'm working." Emmett went. He did not push. He walked out past the pressure washer and the stacked tires, and the calendar from a parts supplier that was 2 years out of date, and he got into the car and shut the door, and sat there in the gray light under the viaduct with the engine off, and only then, in the quiet, did the two things come back to him. The first was his brother's hands. Not oil-stained, he had expected that. Shaking. The whole time, both of them. The fine, steady tremor of a man holding something down with everything he has, and Nolan had known it, because twice he had wiped them on that useless rag when they did not need wiping, and once he had pushed them flat against his thighs. The second thing was on the workbench behind him, next to the vise, weighted down under a socket so it would not blow around. A plain envelope, fat in the middle, unsealed at the flap the way an envelope is when the money has been counted into it by hand. It had a thin skin of dust across the top of it. It had been sitting there long enough to get dusty, and nobody who needs money badly enough to take it lets it sit on a workbench for weeks without opening it. Emmett looked at that shop door in the mirror for a long moment. Then he started the car and pulled out from under the viaduct and drove north. And he did not go back in and ask. He found the book that night on the shelf in the pantry above the folding cot, a nursing text thick as a cinder block with a broken spine and a strip of blue ribbon lying across a page deep inside it, and he opened it there without meaning to pry, and saw the heading at the top, Chapter 12. The margins on both pages were full. 2 hands had written in them, one small and cramped and going uphill, one older and rounder and beautifully even, the hand of a woman who had spent a lifetime writing fingering numbers above notes so a child could follow. He stood in that narrow room holding the book and felt something he had no name for, because he had spent the last 4 days assembling a story in his head in which this book was a headstone, the marker of a life that had been given up so that his mother could keep hers. And he had been carrying that story around, and it had been heavy, and it had felt, in some way, he would not have admitted, useful. When Maeve came in from the bakery a little before dawn, flower on her sleeve and her hair still pinned back for work, he was at the kitchen table with the book open in front of him, and he asked her when she had stopped. She looked at the page and her face changed. "I didn't stop," she said. He said the college had no record past 3 years. "The college doesn't," she said. She took her coat off and hung it on the hook by the door and stood there a moment with her back to him. Then she told him. She said that in the first winter she was here, she had left the book out on the counter by accident, and that his mother had picked it up and read the first 3 pages standing at the sink, and then had asked her what she intended to do about it. She said she had answered that she intended nothing, that the tuition was gone, and that was the end of it, and that his mother had said all right, and had not mentioned it again for 2 days, and then on the 3rd night had come into the kitchen at 8 o'clock with the book and her reading glasses, and had sat down at that table and started reading aloud from Chapter 1 while Maeve washed the dinner things. "Every night," Maeve said. 4 years. She read out loud, and I washed and I dried and I answered when she asked me something. When I didn't know, she'd make me say "I don't know" out loud, and then she'd read it again slower. She said his mother had made her recite drug classes with her hands in the dishwater. She said his mother had drawn the circulatory system on the back of a grocery bag with a pencil that kept breaking. She said that when the arthritis got bad enough that his mother could not hold a book open, she had propped it against the sugar tin and turned the pages with a butter knife. She couldn't teach piano anymore, Maeve said, and her voice was very level, so she taught something else. That's all it was. She came and stood beside the table and looked down at the 2 sets of handwriting in the margins. 12 is where we are, she said. We're not finished. We're just slow, because some nights she can only do a page. Earlier that same night, in the bright warm room behind the ovens on Halsted Street, with the racks cooling and the whole place smelling of new bread, her phone had lit up on the steel table, and it was Toby, 8 years old, calling from her aunt's kitchen in Evanston, where he had lived since their mother died, and where he was fed and warm, and walked to school and loved. He had a song to show her. He had learned it that week at the community center, where he went on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and he held the phone too close, so that all she could see was one eye and part of the ceiling, and then too far so that all she could see was the ceiling, and finally he propped it against a cereal box, and sang the whole thing through with his eyes squeezed shut on the high part. When he finished, he opened one eye to check on her. Maeve told him it was the best thing she had heard all year. He told her he had made up the last line himself because he forgot the real one, and she said that was called composing, and he laughed so hard he fell sideways out of the frame, and she stood there in the warm, bright room with flour to her elbows, and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes with the back of her wrist. It came out over the dishes the following evening, sideways, the way the worst things always do. Emmett had said something about not having known, about 8 years of not being told, and Maeve had stopped with a plate in her hand and said, without any edge in it at all, that she had told him. He asked her what she meant. She dried her hands and went to the pantry, and came back with a shoebox and set it on the table, and took the lid off. And inside were 4 certified mail receipts held together with a paper clip, and under them, a page torn from a legal pad, with 11 dates written down the side in her small uphill hand, and a time beside each one. She said she had called the main number for his company on the water in New York 11 times over 2 years. She said the woman who answered was always polite. She said she had been told each time that the message would be passed along, and once that he was traveling, and once that he did not take calls from outside parties, and that after the 6th call she had started writing the dates down, not out of anger, but because she had begun to feel like she was imagining herself. Then she had written letters, 4 of them, over 18 months, each one sent certified with return receipt requested, and she pushed the receipts across the table toward him. Every one of them had come back stamped and signed for at his address. Every one had been received. Emmett looked at the 4 small green cards for a long time. Then he turned one over and looked at the signature on the back of it, and it was the same on all 4. A fast, confident scrawl he had seen on 10,000 documents across 8 years, and he knew it the way a man knows his own handwriting. Desmond Rourke, 51 years old, ran the office, ran the calendar, ran the door, had stood at his shoulder at his father's funeral, had driven him to the hospital the night he got the scar over his eye, had been the only person on earth with standing authority to decide what reached Emmett Castellano and what did not. He came in the next afternoon at Emmett's request, and he knew before he sat down. You could see it in the way he set his coat over the back of the chair instead of hanging it. The 4 receipts were on the table. Rourke looked at them, and then out the window, and then back, and he started to say something about protecting him, about noise, about how many people came looking with a story about a mother, and Emmett raised one finger, and he stopped. Emmett asked him one question. How much? Rourke said the number. It was small. It was so small that Emmett sat back and looked at him with an expression that Rourke would remember for the rest of his life, because it was not rage. 8 years of a man's loyalty, 4 letters and 11 telephone calls, and a house going cold, all of it against a figure a man in their line of work could lose in a bad week and shrug at. Emmett did not raise his voice. He did not stand up. He said, "You'll want to be at your desk in the morning." Then he made 2 calls. The first was to Adelaide Kerr, who by 10 that night had assembled everything. Rourke's own bookkeeping had recorded across 8 years. The consulting fees, the finder's payments, the little side arrangements he had run through the freight side, thinking nobody was reading, and she filed all of it with the state attorney's office, and with the federal investigators who had been quietly interested in that stretch of waterfront for years, complete and unredacted and entirely legal, because none of it was Emmett's to hide. The second call was longer. Emmett phoned every carrier, every broker, every yard boss and terminal operator and family in 7 cities that the Castellano name meant anything to. One after another, and he did not ask any of them for a favor, and he did not threaten any of them. He simply told them what Rourke had done, plainly, with the receipts, and he let each man arrive at his own conclusion, and every one of them arrived at the same one, because in that business, a man who can be bought for that little is not dangerous, he is worthless. By the next morning, Desmond Rourke's calls were not being returned anywhere. His name came off 2 contracts before noon. Emmett said the last thing to him in the hallway on the way out, and he said it almost gently. "I'm not taking anything from you. I'm just giving you back exactly what you earned." Adelaide Kerr had been working the title for 4 days and had gotten exactly nowhere. And she said so plainly at that kitchen table that the transfer was clean on its face, and that until she knew what had been done with the property after the transfer, she was fighting smoke. It was Maeve who put the notebook on the table. She did it without ceremony, the way she did everything, and she said she did not know if it was anything. It was a school composition book, with a marbled cover, soft at the corners from being carried in a coat pocket, and the first 2/3 of it were columns. Date, what, how much, and a last column that did not say owed and did not say balance. It said seen to. Batteries for the smoke alarm, seen to. 2 prescriptions, seen to. A plumber for the upstairs radiator, seen to. Adelaide turned the pages of it slowly and did not say anything for a while, and Emmett looked at the far wall. But it was the back of the book that Maeve had opened it to. She said his mother had started forgetting things about 2 years ago. Small things, who had come by and what they had said, and that it had frightened her more than she let on, and so Maeve had begun keeping a second list at the back, from the last page forward, so it would not mix with the money. Everyone who came to that house, the date, the name if she had one, the description if she did not, how long they stayed, and what they did while they were there. She said she had done it because his mother had asked her once, in a bad moment, who had been here today, and had not believed the answer. Adelaide went through that list line by line with a pen in her hand. The gas man, a woman collecting for a church, Sterling, 7 visits over 2 years, each one under half an hour, and then a line from the previous autumn that read, in Maeve's small uphill letters, a silver-haired man came with Sterling, did not give a name, did not speak to her, walked into every room, including the basement and the back bedroom, and took photographs with a small camera, stayed 20 minutes, and underneath it, because Maeve had gone out onto the porch afterward and stood in the cold in her sweater to watch them leave, a license plate, all of it, every character. Adelaide read the plate twice, and then got up and went into the front room and made a telephone call, and when she came back, she stood behind her chair with both hands on it, and said the man's name, and said the finance company that name sat behind, and then said the thing she had been trying to find for 4 days. The house on Fullerton Avenue had been used as collateral. 11 months after the transfer, Sterling Castellano had pledged it against a private loan, and the loan had been made through a holding company, and the holding company answered to a man named Ambrose Quinlan. Nobody in that kitchen said anything for a moment. The man standing by the door, who had driven Emmett for 3 years and had seen him do a great many things, looked at Emmett's face and then looked at the floor and did not look up again. And later, when another man asked him how it had gone, he said only that he had never seen him like that and did not want to talk about it. Adelaide sat down. She said she wanted him to understand exactly what this meant before he did anything, because he was not going to like it, and it was going to be true anyway. She said she could prove the forgery. She said she could probably prove the coercion of the witness. She said she could take Sterling apart in a criminal court and enjoy it. And she said none of that would give him back the house, because the moment that property was pledged to a lender who had no knowledge of the fraud, that lender became something the law protects, and a lender the law protects does not lose his security because somebody else committed a crime before he ever got there. She said the remedy existed. She said it lived in civil court, and it moved at the speed civil court moves at, which was measured in years, 3 at the low end, and 5 was not unusual, and that the woman upstairs was not going to be given 3 years by anybody. She closed the notebook and slid it back to Maeve. "You found in an hour what I could not find in 4 days," she said. Then she looked at Emmett. "But the paper is out of my reach now. It's in his." Rosalind heard the doorbell from her chair at the top of the stairs, and knew immediately that it was wrong, because nobody rang that bell in the evening, and because there were 2 sets of feet on the porch, and neither of them belonged to anyone who lived there. She had spent 2 years in that house learning the sounds it made. She could tell the mailman from the meter reader by the weight of the step. She sat forward and put both hands on the arms of the chair. Downstairs the door opened and there were voices, low and even and unhurried, and then Maeve's voice saying yes, that was her, saying it the way a person says it, when they have been waiting a long while for someone to come and say a name out loud. Rosalind heard a folder open. She heard the word complaint, and she heard the word bracelet, and she heard the word reactivated, and it was that last word that got her out of the chair, because it meant somebody had gone and reached back into something old and finished, and lifted it up again on purpose. She stood. She had not stood without help in a long time, and she stood now without thinking about it at all. And the room tilted, and she took hold of the banister with both hands and started down. Her slippers were somewhere behind her. The stair runner was worn through in the middle from 34 years of her own feet, and she felt every board of it. Halfway down she could see into the kitchen, could see the corner of the table, and a dark blue sleeve, and Maeve standing very straight beside the sink with her back to the window and her chin up, saying something quiet and reasonable, saying that she understood, saying that she would come, asking only whether she could set the kettle off the heat first, because there was an old woman upstairs who would want tea, and who did not always remember to turn off a burner. And Rosalind, gripping that banister, thought that she had spent her whole life around dignity, and had never once seen it look like that. She called her name. It came out thin, and she hated it. And she called it again, louder, the way she used to call down a hallway at the conservatory, and everything in that kitchen stopped. Maeve turned, and when she saw the old woman clinging to the banister, 4 steps from the bottom in her nightdress with her white hair loose, something moved across her face that had not moved in 4 years, and she started forward, and one of the officers said her name, and she stopped, and she said, "Please, just let me put her back in the chair, please." They said she could not do that. She said, "All right." She said it without any argument at all, and then she looked past them and up the stairs, and she said, "It's nothing. It's a mistake, and I'll fix it. Go back up, you'll catch cold." Rosalind said no. She said, "It is not nothing." She said, "This is my house, and I say who stands in my kitchen." And she came down another step, and then Emmett was there, coming out of the front room fast, and he got an arm around his mother, and took her weight and held her, and she fought him. She was 71 years old, and weighed almost nothing, and she fought her son on those stairs with both hands, hitting at his forearm, saying, "Let me go," saying, "That girl has not left me for 4 years, and I am not going to stand here and watch her walk out that door," saying, "Do something. You can do something." And Emmett held her, and did not answer, and did not let go. Because there was nothing in that hallway that could be bought or frightened or turned around, and the only thing he could do in that moment was keep his mother from falling down the last 4 stairs. So that is what he did. They went out through the front. Maeve did not look back. The door closed and the cold came in and stayed, and the kettle went on rattling on the stove until Emmett went in and took it off. It was a long night. He sat with his mother in the front room until she finally slept in the chair, and then he covered her. And then he stood at the window until the street had been empty for hours. And at some point in that long stretch before dawn, when the light outside was still the color of dirty water, he opened the front door to bring in the milk crate, and there was an envelope lying on the mat. It was thick, manila, the old kind with a string wound around a paper button, swollen at the middle with paper. No stamp, no postmark, no name on the front of it, and no name on the back, and no writing anywhere on it at all. He stood there on the cold step and turned it over twice, looking down both directions of Fullerton Avenue, at the unbroken snow on the walk, at the single set of tracks coming up to the porch and going away again, and then he carried it inside and set it on the table and cut the string. They did not take her to a holding cell. They took her down a corridor on the 2nd floor and into a room with a table and 3 chairs and a window with wire in the glass, and the woman waiting inside was not from the district and did not work for the city and did not introduce herself as anyone's arresting officer. Her name was Delphine Aubry. She was an assistant United States attorney, and she had driven in from the federal building, and she had a folder in front of her that was not about a bracelet. She began by apologizing for the hour, and then she said that she wanted to be straight with Maeve because Maeve had had enough people be indirect with her. She said the theft complaint was garbage. She said she had read it twice on the way over, and that it would not survive a first hearing, and that everyone in the building knew it. She said the reason it kept coming back to life was that somebody kept feeding it, and that this was not a legal problem. It was a person problem. Then she opened the folder. She said she was not interested in Sterling Castellano. She said Sterling Castellano was a man who had stolen from his mother, and that the state would deal with him in due course, and that she personally hoped they took their time about it. What her office was interested in, and had been interested in for a good while, was the freight and the waterfront, and the name that sat over all of it, and she said the name out loud and watched Maeve's face when she said it. She said Maeve had lived in that house for 4 years. She said she had answered that door, kept that notebook, watched who came and who went, and had now spent the better part of 2 weeks in a room with the man himself. She said nobody was asking her to lie about anything. She said all they wanted was what she had already seen with her own eyes, written down, sworn to, and testified to if it came to that. Then she took out one page and turned it around and slid it across the table, and she went through the 2 terms on it one at a time with the tip of her pen. The first was that the complaint would be vacated in full and expunged, not dismissed, expunged, so that it would not exist anywhere for anyone to find, ever again. The second was that the State Board would be petitioned directly by her office for reinstatement of Maeve's standing as a nursing student in good order, credits intact, the 3 completed years restored, the record wiped of the interruption, with a letter of support that in her experience no board had ever declined. She set the pen down on top of the page. She said, "You would be able to finish. You'd be licensed inside 18 months. Maeve looked at the page. She did not read it fast. She read it the way she read everything, all the way to the bottom, both terms, twice. And Delphine Aubry let her do it, and did not fill the silence, because she had done this many times and she knew that the silence was doing the work. Outside the wire glass, a plow went down the street and scraped and was gone. The radiator in the corner of the room ticked. Maeve sat with her hands flat on the table on either side of the paper, and she thought about a woman propping a book against a sugar tin and turning the pages with a butter knife, and about 4 years of chapters read aloud over the sound of running water, and about a hand pushed down into an overcoat pocket on a spring afternoon that she had not been there to see, and about the fact that everything on that page in front of her was exactly, precisely, item by item, what she had wanted every single night for 4 years. Then she picked it up by the corner and slid it back across the table. Delphine Aubry did not reach for it. "I want to make sure you understand what you're doing," she said, "because I have sat in this room with a great many people, and I have never once had somebody hand this back to me in under 5 minutes. Do you understand what you just turned down?" "Yes," Maeve said. "I just turned down everything I want." She stood up and pushed the chair in and put her hands in her coat pockets. "You can put it in a drawer," she said. "It'll keep." Nobody in that house ever heard about it. Not that night, not that week, not for a long time after. The bond was posted before noon, and when Maeve came back up the front steps on Fullerton Avenue, she said only that it had been a misunderstanding and that it was over, and then she went in and put the kettle on. The steakhouse on Hubbard Street had put out its exterior lights and turned the chairs up on half the tables, and the last of the kitchen was going home through the alley door when Emmett came in through the front, alone, with his coat still buttoned. 3 men stood up from the bar. He knew them the way he knew the weather, which is to say without effort and without interest, and he did not slow down. The first one moved into his path and said the restaurant was closed, and Emmett said his name, and then said his mother's name, and then said the name of the street she still lived on off Milwaukee Avenue, the block number, and mentioned that she had put a new railing on the front steps in the fall. The man did not move for a moment, and then he did move, sideways. The second one had already thought better of it. The third one, younger, made the mistake of putting a hand up, and Emmett stopped in front of him and looked at him with something close to patience, and said his father's first name, and where he had worked for 22 years, and what had happened to the pension when the company went through the second bankruptcy, and asked him quietly whether his father was doing any better this winter. The young man's hand came down. Nobody in that room touched anybody. That was the whole of it. Emmett walked the length of the dining room, and Sterling was in the back corner at the round table he always took. 39 years old, white shirt still crisp at the end of a long day, sleeves rolled in 3 even folds, a photograph of himself with a state senator hanging on the wall behind him where every guest could see it. There was a bottle open in front of him, and 1 glass. Emmett pulled out a chair and sat down across from his brother, and reached over and took the bottle and turned Sterling's second glass upright and poured for himself, and drank, and set the glass down. He said the wine was decent. Sterling said, "You could have called." "I did call," Emmett said. "For 8 years. Then he began, and he did not raise his voice once, and he did not accuse his brother of anything. He simply started laying things on the table, the way a man empties his pockets. He said that on the 1st of every month, for 96 months, a transfer had left an account in New York and landed in an account that was not their mother's, and he said the routing number of that account, out loud from memory. He said that 19 months ago a schoolteacher's pension had been redirected, and he named the day of the month it had always arrived and the day it stopped. He said that a general power of attorney had been drawn and signed, and that he had a document examiner's preliminary opinion on the signature, and that the opinion used the word inconsistent 4 times. He said that a consent form for a valve replacement had been sent to Sterling's office 3 times, and acknowledged 3 times, and returned 0 times, and he said the dates. He said that a silver-haired man had walked through every room of the house on Fullerton Avenue the previous autumn taking photographs, and he said the plate number of the car that man had left in, and he watched his brother's face when he said it, and that was the only moment in the entire conversation when Sterling looked away. He said, "You pledged our mother's house to Ambrose Quinlan." Sterling started to speak, and Emmett kept going. Calmly, the way a man reads out an inventory, he said he knew what the loan was for. He said he knew about the 2 locations that had closed quietly last year, and the 3rd one that was closing in the spring. He said he knew about the liquor distributor who had stopped extending credit in October, and the payroll that had gone out 4 days late twice since Thanksgiving. He said he knew which of Sterling's partners had already been asking questions. He said all of it flatly, without pleasure, and by the end of it, Sterling had not touched his glass, and the crisp white shirt had gone dark under the arms, and the man in the photograph on the wall behind him looked like a stranger. Emmett stood up and put his coat straight. "Here's what happens now," he said. "Tomorrow, before she wakes up, you're at that house. You come alone and you come in through the front door like a person, and you bring a pen." Sterling said something about lawyers. Emmett looked down at him. "Bring 1, he said. "Bring 6. Every one of them is going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you, and they'll charge you for it." He set the glass down on the white cloth, exactly where he had found it, and walked out through the dark dining room, and nobody at the bar looked up. The condition came back through 2 intermediaries, and it was not negotiable. Alone. No car but his own. Nobody following. Nothing in his pockets. Maeve was in the front hall when he came down, and she did not ask where he was going, and he understood that she had already worked it out, and had decided not to make him say it. She held something out to him. It was a handkerchief, white, ironed, a small letter R embroidered in the corner, in thread gone the color of weak tea. She said his mother kept a box of them, and had given one to every student on the morning of an examination. 60 years of them, and had always said the same thing, which was that a person cannot play with a shaking hand, and that holding something helps. Maeve said, "It doesn't work." She knew it didn't work. Then she put it into his hand and closed his fingers over it. "I've carried one for 4 years anyway." The container yard sat south of the river on the Calumet, where the city stops pretending. Acres of stacked boxes gone, the colors of rust and old paint, gulls on the light poles, the water moving black and slow past the wall. Ambrose Quinlan was 68 and stood beside a folding table with 2 chairs on it that somebody had carried out into the open, specifically so that neither man would have to sit indoors with the other, and he had 4 men standing well back at the fence line, and he made a point of showing Emmett his own empty hands before he sat. He said, "I'll tell you the first thing before you say anything at all, because I don't want it hanging over this." He said he had not known. He said the loan had come to him through a holding company with a name that meant nothing, secured against a residential property on the north side that came to him as an address and a valuation, and nothing else, and that the first time he learned whose mother slept in that house was when a lawyer named Kerr had made an inquiry, and his own people had gone back through the file. He said he had been in this business 40 years, and that there were lines that were not written anywhere, and that a man's mother was one of them, and he said, "That's why I'm sitting here. If I'd known, I would not have taken it. That's not a favor to you. That's just the truth." Emmett said he wanted the paper. Quinlan said he understood that. And then he said the loan was legally sound, and that he had done nothing wrong, and that he was under no obligation of any kind. And Emmett said he knew all of that. And Quinlan said, "Good, then we can talk." He did not want money. He said it almost apologetically. He said money he had. What he wanted was the Eastern Hall, the terminal rights and the carrier agreements, and the yard on the far side that fed them. The corridor Emmett had spent 8 years building out of nothing with his own hands and his own name, and other men's willingness to answer his telephone. The thing that had made $22,000 a month feel like a small automatic gesture. The whole spine of it. He said, "All of it. Not a share. All of it. And the house is clear tomorrow." Emmett did not answer right away. He sat there on a folding chair in a container yard with the wind coming off the water and thought about what he was actually being asked to hand over. And it was not property. It was the reason men stood up when he came into a room. It was the thing that had let him call 7 cities in one night and be answered by every one of them. It was every ounce of the leverage that had made him worth being afraid of. And without it, he would be a man with a good coat and some savings and a name that would start going quiet within a year, and he understood that clearly and completely, and he sat with it. And what surprised him, sitting there, was not how much it hurt. It was how little. Because it had bought him nothing. 8 years of it. And it had not bought a signature on a consent form. Had not bought back 14 months. Had not gotten a single one of 31 recordings sent. Had not put one warm meal on that table, or kept one girl from standing in a bakery at 3 in the morning. He had built an enormous machine and pointed it at the world. And the one house he had meant it to protect had gone cold with the machine running at full power the entire time. His hand was around the handkerchief in his coat pocket. He could feel the stitched letter under his thumb. "Draw it up," Emmett said. Quinlan looked at him for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he did not expect to see. And then he took out a pen. He would not have come if Emmett had called. So Maeve called. She stood at the kitchen window with the phone against her ear and let her voice do the thing it had done in that house for 4 years, small and apologetic. And she said she was sorry to bother him, and that she was frightened, and that Emmett had been asking about papers and she did not know what to say to him, and that she thought Sterling should come and handle it himself before it got worse. She heard exactly what she expected to hear on the other end, which was a man being reassured that the arrangement still held, that the girl with the police report over her head was still the girl with the police report over her head. He said he would be there in the morning. She said thank you. She hung up and stood there with her hand still on the phone for a moment, and then she went and set 4 chairs around the dining table. He came at 9, with his coat over his arm, and his sleeves already rolled, and it was Maeve who opened the door for him, and he did not so much as look at her going past, and it was Maeve who closed it behind him and turned the bolt. Rosalind was in the chair at the end of the table, with a blanket across her knees. Emmett sat opposite. On the table between them was a stack of paper turned face down. Sterling started warm. He kissed his mother's cheek and asked how she was sleeping and said the house looked good. And then he sat and folded his hands and said, "All right, what's this about?" Emmett turned over the first page and slid it across. Then the second. Then the third. He did not explain any of them, and he did not raise his voice. The ledger of 96 transfers, with the receiving account circled, the pension redirection with the date, the examiner's report, and Sterling looked at that one longer than the others, and then set it down without a word. The 3 unreturned consent forms with their acknowledgement stamps. The notebook, open at the back, at a line in a small uphill hand about a silver-haired man with a camera and a license plate. And last, the loan document, and the name Ambrose Quinlan, and the address of the house they were sitting in. Sterling's answers came in the order Emmett had known they would. First, it was a misunderstanding, and there were things about the family finances nobody appreciated. Then it was that he had been managing an impossible situation alone for years, while everyone else lived their lives. Then his eyes went red and his voice cracked, and he said, "I'm your blood," and said it twice, and said that whatever else was true, that was true. Then it was Bianca, who had pushed him, who had never understood the pressure, who had wanted a life he could not pay for. And then, when none of that moved anything in the room, he turned his head toward the woman at the end of the table and said, "She signed it. Ask her. She sat right there and she signed it, and she knew what she was doing, and now everybody wants to act like I held her hand." Rosalind put both hands on the arms of the chair and stood up. Nobody helped her. She stood at the end of her own table in her cardigan, with the blanket sliding off her knees to the floor, and she looked at her eldest son and said, "I did sign it. I signed it because you told me it would keep this house safe, and I have never in my life been able to tell when you were lying to me. That is my fault and I will carry it." Then she said, "But you are wrong that I knew nothing." She said that 2 springs ago she had been in the kitchen at the back of the house, and he had been on the telephone in the front hall, and had not known she was there. She said she did not hear a name, and did not hear a number, and would not have understood either one. She said what she heard was his voice. "You were 9 years old when you broke the window over the sink," she said, "and you came and stood in the doorway, and said my name in exactly that voice, and I have known that sound for 39 years. You were frightened of somebody, not of me, not of the bank, of a person." She looked at Emmett. and I said nothing. For 2 years I said nothing. To you, to Maeve, to anybody. And I let this house get cold around me, and I let that girl carry me on her back, and I did it on purpose. Her hands were shaking and she did not hide them, because I knew what you would do if I told you. I knew you would go and find whoever it was, and I have already buried your father. I was not going to bury a son to keep a son, so I chose the cold. She sat down slowly. Emmett stood up. He did not say anything at all. He took his phone out of his coat and held it, and his thumb did not move, and everyone in that room understood exactly what was being decided. Maeve came around the end of the table and stopped in front of him. She did not touch him. She said, quietly, "You make that call and you'll fix tonight. And in 20 years, some boy is going to be standing in a doorway looking at his mother in a cold house, and he'll have your name to thank for it." She let that sit. "That's the whole business you're in. It's just other people's mothers." Emmett looked at the phone in his hand. Then he set it face down on the table. Across the room, Sterling's own phone lit up and buzzed against the wood, and it was Bianca, and the message said she had been sitting with a federal attorney since 8 that morning, and that her lawyer had told her to protect herself, and that she was sorry. He signed it at that table with 3 people watching, and he signed it badly, the pen skipping once, and then he pushed the consent form away from himself and sat back and looked at nothing, and Maeve was the one who put it into the envelope and sealed it, and Adelaide Kerr walked it into the hospital herself that same afternoon, because she did not trust anything that mattered to a courier. The surgery was set for the following week. They took her down early, and Emmett walked beside the bed as far as the doors where they stop letting you walk, and his mother took hold of his sleeve and told him to eat something, and then the doors closed. He sat in the waiting area on the 4th floor, in a molded chair, the color of oatmeal, between a man in coveralls who had come straight from a job and a woman doing a crossword to keep her hands busy, and nobody in that room knew who he was, and nobody moved aside for him, and there was nothing on earth he could do to make the clock go faster. He drank 2 cups of terrible coffee. He read the same laminated sign about hand hygiene until he could have recited it. When the surgeon finally came out in the middle of the afternoon and said the words that were good, Emmett stood up and shook his hand, and then sat back down in the same chair for another quarter of an hour without moving, and the woman with the crossword offered him a tissue from her purse without saying anything, and he took it. She came home 11 days later. The piano came home the day before that. It had taken 3 dealers and a broker and a hotel in Milwaukee that had been using it in a lobby as a place to set drinks, and Emmett had paid what he was asked without a word of argument, and had paid the movers extra to come on a Sunday. 6 men brought it up the front steps and through the door on a padded dolly with the legs off. And Maeve stood in the corner of the front room with her hands over her mouth while they set the legs and lowered it, and it went down into the oak floor and settled. And the 4 deep marks that had been sitting there empty for 2 winters took the weight and disappeared underneath it. It fit. Of course it fit. Nobody said anything for a moment, and then one of the movers, an older man, said quietly that the floor had been waiting, and picked up his blanket and went out. She was upstairs resting when Maeve went in to clear the nightstand and change the water in her glass. The 7-day pill organizer was going into a drawer because there was a new one now, a proper one from the hospital pharmacy with all of the compartments full. And Maeve picked up the old one, and it rattled wrong. She turned it over. The paper lining in the bottom of the case had lifted at one corner, and when she tipped it, something slid out from underneath and dropped onto the bedspread. It was the bracelet, thin gold, worn soft, the clasp a little loose, exactly as it had been described on a police complaint that had sat over her head for the better part of a year. Rosalind opened her eyes and saw it lying there on the blanket between them, and something crossed her face, and then she remembered. She said, in a very small voice, that he had come through the house 4 or 5 times looking in drawers, opening the good cabinet, saying he was checking on things, and that after the 3rd time she had begun putting away anything that was left. She said she had put it there and had meant to tell somebody where. She said the words, and then stopped, because she had arrived at the rest of it, and Maeve watched her get there. 2 officers in the kitchen, a word like reactivated, a girl standing very straight beside the sink asking whether she could take the kettle off the heat. Rosalind's chin went down and her hands came up, and she started to cry the way old women cry, almost silently, ashamed of it. Maeve sat down on the edge of the bed and closed the bracelet in her palm and said, lightly, "Don't. You hid it well." That was all she said. That evening they helped her down and she asked to sit at it. And they lifted the fallboard for her, and she put both hands on the keys, the same hands, swollen at the knuckles, the skin split across the backs of the fingers from 2 winters in a house at 13 degrees, and everyone in the room heard the tremor before they saw it. She found the position. She played 7 notes. On the 8th, her hand would not do it, and she took both hands off the keys and put them in her lap, and she laughed once, wetly, and said that was a start. And Maeve was standing in the doorway with her hand pressed hard over her mouth and, for the first time in 4 years, crying openly in front of another person. 7 notes was enough. Peggy Sturgis came over on a Thursday with a coffee cake and stayed an hour listening to 7 notes played twice more. And when she got up to go, she asked Emmett to walk her across, and on her own kitchen table, she had the calendar out already, opened flat, held down at the corners with a sugar bowl and a jar of pencils. She said she had told him it would keep, and that it had kept long enough. Then she turned the book back through the seasons, page after page, and showed him what she had marked. On the first day of every month, in her small square secretary's hand, in pencil, always in pencil, she had written the same short note. Rosalind out front, 9 to 11. Blue coat, or Rosalind out front, cold, went in at 10:30. Or Rosalind out front, hair set, sat till noon. It ran back through that winter and the one before it and the one before that. Peggy turned the pages slowly and let him read them himself. She said his mother would come out onto that top step on the 1st of the month in whatever the best coat still was, with her hair done and her good shoes on, and she would sit or she would stand at the railing, and she would look up the street toward the corner. Peggy said she had thought at first it was a doctor's appointment, and then she had thought it was church, and then she had noticed that it was always the same date, and one morning she had gone over and asked her outright what she was waiting for. She said Rosalind had been embarrassed, and had smoothed her coat, and had told her it was nothing, that the 1st of the month was the day her youngest son thought about her, and that she liked to be ready in case that was the month he came. Peggy closed the calendar and put her hand flat on the cover. She never knew whether $1 of it landed, she said. She wasn't sitting out there for the money. She was sitting out there because you were thinking of her, and she wanted to look nice for it. Emmett did the arithmetic standing at that table, with his coat still on. 8 years, 12 months a year. 96 times a woman had put on a good coat, and done her hair, and gone out onto a cold step, and sat where she could see the corner. 96 mornings. He had made 96 transfers, and had never once thought about the 1st of the month as anything but a date on a standing instruction. Later that same week, the last piece came apart in his hands, and it came apart by accident. He had the postcard with him, as he had carried it since the beginning, and he was going back through the thick envelope that had been left on the mat that night with no name and no postmark, the one that had held the text messages, the coercion, the copies of everything Sterling had made a witness sign. He laid a page of it beside the postcard on the table without thinking about it. It was the same hand. Not similar. The identical uphill lean on the letter D, the same way of not quite closing an A, shaking on both, the tremor of a man writing with his hands not steady. He drove down to Pilsen. The bays were open, and the radio was on, and Nolan came out from under a car, wiping his hands on the same useless rag. And when he saw what his brother was holding, he stopped where he was and did not smile this time. Emmett held up the postcard. He said one word. You. Nolan looked at it for a while. Then he said, yeah. That was all. He did not explain, and he did not apologize, and he did not offer anything about why a man who had taken money out of his mother's account and signed his name where he was told to sign it had also, one night, bought a postcard and written 8 words on it and dropped it in a public box on the far side of the city where there was nothing to look at and nobody to see him do it. He did not say that he had walked past that box 4 times before he let go of it. He did not say why the letters had not come out straight. Emmett stood in the doorway of that shop with the sound of the radio between them and looked at his brother's hands hanging at his sides, and remembered that they had been shaking that first afternoon too, the whole time, and that there had been an envelope of money sitting on that workbench under a socket, gathering dust for weeks, because a man who cannot bring himself to open it is a man who has already understood what it cost. The pawn shop on Ashland Avenue still had all 3 tickets in the system, and the man behind the counter looked up the 3rd one without much interest, and said it had never been a pledge at all, that she had come in and sold outright, and had asked for the money in an envelope, and that the note in the file said Monument Company. And he gave Emmett the name of a firm out on Cicero Avenue that had been carving stones for 4 generations. The woman in that office found the account in under a minute. A flat granite marker, the smallest they made, ordered 4 years ago, paid in installments of $40 a month against a balance that had come down slowly and steadily for 2.5 years, and then had simply stopped, 19 months ago, and had not moved since. She said the marker was still in the yard. She said it had been cut and finished and never delivered, and that they held them for a while and then eventually they did not, and she said it a little apologetically, as though the arithmetic of that were her fault. Emmett asked her the balance. It was less than he had spent on the coat he was wearing. The cemetery was out past the western edge of the city, where the streets stop having names and start having numbers. A wide, flat field with a chain-link fence and gravel paths, and the section she was in was the newer part where the grass had not fully knit. He found it by the row number the office gave him. There was no stone. There was a plastic card in a metal holder pushed into the ground, the temporary kind the funeral home leaves so the family can find the place, and 4 winters had taken the printing on it down to a gray ghost of itself. He crouched and turned it toward the light to read it, and the name of a woman he had never met came up out of the plastic, and under it 2 years. And that was all. He stayed down there for a while with his forearms on his knees. He thought about a folder on a dining table, and a line in a clerk's careless handwriting that had said headstone and had meant nothing to him at the time. He thought about the month it stopped, the same month a pension went somewhere else, the same month a check to Maeve Donnelly was written for the last time. He understood, kneeling on that cold ground, exactly what his mother's life had been paid for, and who had paid it. $40 at a time, out of a plot of grass in a field on the far west side that had gone on being blank for 19 months, so that a woman in a house on Fullerton Avenue could keep taking her medicine. Adelaide Kerr had driven out with him and had waited at the path. When he came back, she did not ask him anything. She opened her case and took out a single sheet and held it out, and he took it and looked at it, and it was a federal form he had never seen before, with 2 conditions typed on it, and a line at the bottom where a person could decline, and Maeve Donnelly's name was on that line in her small uphill hand, dated the morning after they had taken her out of that kitchen. He read it twice. He read the 2 conditions, and he understood in one motion what she had been given the chance to have and what she had done with it, and he stood there in the wind in a gravel lot in front of a field of markers with the paper in his hand and could not speak. Adelaide put her case back into the car. She said one thing, and then she got in and let him stand there as long as he needed to. She had it, Adelaide said. The whole way through she had it. She just wouldn't spend you to get it. A year later, the gray stone house on Fullerton Avenue had a small brass plate beside the door that read Rosalind House, and inside it, the front room where a piano had stood alone was a classroom 3 days a week. It was not a charity, and nobody there liked the word. It was a training center for home caregivers. 40 hours of certification, a legal clinic on Saturday mornings run out of the dining room by Adelaide Kerr and 2 of her associates who came without being paid, a written contract required of every family that hired anyone through its door, a wage floor printed at the top of that contract in letters nobody could miss, and a telephone line, answered by a live person, that a caregiver anywhere in the state could call for free when something felt wrong, and they had no idea who to tell. Rosalind taught the piano again on Tuesdays, an hour at a time, 2 students at a sitting, and she did not play much herself, but she could still hear everything, and every child who came through learned very quickly that wrist up meant wrist up. In the kitchen, on the wall above the counter where the kettle had rattled through so many winters, there was a framed diploma with Maeve Donnelly's name on it, hanging in the same narrow room where a folding cot had once been pushed against the pantry shelf. She had finished on her own. She had gone back and paid the tuition herself, and taken the last year at night, and passed the board the first time, and the certificate that hung there had been earned without a single favor from anybody. Emmett gave her nothing that year. No gift, no check, no gesture. On the morning of the anniversary, he handed her a plain envelope, and inside it was a statement of wages, 4 years of them, itemized month by month at a fair market rate, with interest calculated at the statutory figure, on company letterhead, stamped, signed by his chief financial officer, made out to her as a creditor of record. She read it standing at the counter and looked up at him and did not say thank you, and he did not want her to, because the entire point of the paper was that it was not a kindness, it was a debt, and it had always been a debt, and she took it as one. Sterling was sentenced that spring. Nolan came every Sunday. He never brought an apology with him. Not once. Only a bag of groceries and a set of tools. and he fixed the porch railing and the basement drain and the back gate that had hung crooked for a decade, and he sat with his mother for an hour, and then went home. And over that year, he paid back every dollar he had taken in amounts small enough to be honest. In late autumn, they held a recital in the front room with 14 folding chairs and a plate of cookies on the sideboard. And a boy named Toby played a piece he had been working on since summer, and he got through the hard part in the middle without stopping. And when the last note was done, he did not bow. He turned around on the bench and scanned the rows until he found his sister, and grinned at her, and she put both hands up and clapped over her head so he would be sure to see. In the back row, a man sat with his hands resting on his knees. There was no one standing behind him. There had not been for a year, and there would not be again, and he had come in through the same front door as everyone else, and had taken the last seat, because he arrived late. What that year taught the people in that house is something worth carrying out of it. Money can be sent from a great distance and can arrive on time every month for 8 years and still not be presents. Family is not settled by blood alone, but by who is standing in the room when nobody is watching and there is nothing to be gained. And the people who do the quiet work of caring for our parents, the ones who show up in the dark hours and are thanked the least, are not invisible. They are simply unrecorded, and any of us can pick up a pen and change that. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today, so you never miss the new stories we bring you. We would truly love to know how this one landed for you, so tell us in the comments what you felt, honestly and from the heart, because we read them, and they mean a great deal to us. Wishing every one of you good health, a peaceful heart, and quiet joy in your days. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.